Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have back with me my good friend Carolyn Baker. Carolyn, hello, and thank you for joining us.
Hi, Luke. It's really a pleasure to join you today.
For people who have seen us have these conversations before, they will already know this isn't really a traditional interview. I have had some people watch my channel and say, like, why doesn't he ask questions and shut up? Why does he talk so much? We actually have conversations, a little more back and forth. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted you to come on today because Carolyn, for those of you who are not following along, Carolyn has shifted into this really cool mode lately. I think it's cool. Carolyn is an author. She's a speaker. She's a Substacker now, and that's kind of this phase that you're in now. I was introduced to Carolyn through her work that I discovered through some religious trauma courses that I took online, and then I found her books, and I just started to dig through them. Have loved them. They've made a profound impact on my life. So I reached out to Carolyn via email, and we made fast friends, and we've been talking on and off ever since. We probably at this point have had more regular phone calls with each other than we have these recorded things, haven't we?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think so.
And to this point, we've even exchanged emergency contact information with each other. So if it ever comes to a point where, God forbid, I can't track Carolyn down, I have ways to find her, and same goes for you. So I'm super excited, Carolyn, that you've joined me again today. What I really want to hit people to is the work that you're doing on Substack, and then I want to call out one particular article for the sake of our conversation today. But can you just talk about what you're doing right now, this mode that you're in with Substack and the work that you're doing on there and in your life in general?
Sure. Yeah, so I've been a coach for about 15 years, and before that, a psychotherapist. And right now, I'm really building my coaching practice because lots of people are freaking out. They want support as we go through these terrible times. And so I'm doing a lot of that, which I absolutely love. And I've also started writing this weekly column on Substack. And one of the entries, which I'm sure we're going to be talking about, is how would you start your own collapse support group? And let me just go back to the word collapse for a minute, because we're not in just some rough times or a rough patch. We're in a decline of Western civilization as we know it. And I watched a video last night on Amazon Prime that curled my socks. It's called 2073. And it intermingles some science fiction, hypothesis about how things might look in 2073 with some really credible journalists who are covering what's happening right now. I watched it right before I went to bed, which I don't advise, but check it out on Amazon Prime, 2073. And when you really think about this could happen in less than 25 years, it's very sobering. And regardless of what's going to happen or what is happening now, we all need places where we can talk about it, where we can network with other people and feel support as we go through these incredibly difficult times. I like to call it islands of sanity in a sea of chaos. And we all need those islands.
Is that the name of your Substack? Have you titled your Substack, or is that? I feel like I've seen that title before.
Yeah, my title of my Substack is Carolyn's Blog. But there's a logo on there. There's a little logo on there that has a picture of an island in the middle of a sea. It says Islands of Sanity in a Sea of Chaos.
Okay, wonderful. And it seems like you're putting out about one post a week. Is that about the
1 week? Yeah, I usually post on Fridays.
Okay. And just to anyone tuning in here, like, these are good. These are really good. If you like books, like the kind that Carolyn writes, if you've read any of her work, and even if you haven't, if you like books that just sort of feed into your life at the moment you occupy, if you are a person who, not someone who I would say is highly religious, but you're deeply spiritual, I use that term to talk about my inward journey of knowing myself and being connected with reality. However you define that, Carolyn's work is always focused on those things. And it's so well timed what you're putting out there on Substack, because it's not sometimes the material that you'll find in a book, it can take a year or two or more for, from the beginning of writing a book for it to, make it onto someone's bookshelf. Your stuff is very timely. It's oriented around current events, and it also is sort of timeless too, because I mean, what you just pointed out, 2073, that's not tomorrow. Like that kind of takes a little of the emergency sort of, oh my gosh, the sky is falling right now. But it's also not like there isn't time to respond. There isn't time to take a breath, center yourself around good thinking and clear ideas, and make decisions for yourself. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And that's why I've been doing this work for about 15 years. Because, I'm all about preparation. I'm not about, oh my God, my hair is on fire. What the hell am I going to do? It's about thinking, deeply about where we are likely to go, and then preparing emotionally and spiritually. And a huge part of that is connection with each other.
Absolutely. Which you called out that I want to talk about how to create a collapse support group. You're going to see me glance over occasionally because I've got it open on this other screen. First of all, I just really quick before we dive into this, I just think this is so good. And it's of all the stuff that you have shared, so much of it seems sort of personally useful. This one I like because it's not only personally useful, but it feels corporately useful. And in the sense that what I feel is happening on a level of strategy in terms of, if you want to call it an attack on democracy or an attack on the way of life as we've known it, one of the key elements of what I see happening is division and isolation. So they're trying to get us physically out of the same spaces with one another, isolated. Right. And those two things, I mean, and it's important to point out the physical separation too, because I am connected with you virtually, and I know you have a lot of meaningful connections with people that aren't physical. And so it's not to poo-poo those connections. I mean, we wouldn't be doing this if those things weren't an option. But there is something really precious and rare and sort of irreplaceable about local, physical proximity to one another. Would you agree with that?
Totally. Yeah.
So I want to, before we dive into this, I just kind of want to help set up why the hell you're talking about this and why the hell we should be listening to you talk about this. Like, what is it that you feel qualifies you to have all of these things to say at this stage in your life? I mean, I agree that you should be talking about these things, but what sort of put you in this place? Or did you just get bored and you're retired and you just want to talk about something? Or you said you've been doing this work for a while. Tell us about that.
Yeah, back in 2007, I started doing some research on, what's actually happening in the world in terms of climate chaos, in terms of the financial systems, in terms of, authoritarian governments and the preference now in 72% of the world for authoritarian governments. I didn't realize it was that high until I watched this documentary, 2073, and 72% of the world is governed by authoritarians in one way or other. Some are worse than others. And so, way back when, 15 years ago, I guess around 2007, I began to look at people who were researching our situation and realized that, sooner or later, but probably sooner, the collapse of industrial civilization was going to happen, and that this would change everything in our lives. And I didn't know when it was going to happen, but I knew that we needed to be prepared. And one of the terms that I encountered when I was researching all this is the term overshoot, which just means that human beings are living beyond the capacity of the planet to carry us.
Okay.
And so overshoot is happening right now. And it's one reason that some of these tech bros want to get to Mars, because they know that eventually resources are going to be gone and the planet will not be able to carry us through. that's when I begin to write books on the collapse of industrial civilization. You can check out those books at my website, carolynbaker.net, and just see for yourself and do your own research about what is actually happening. It's worse than just the financial system is, messed up right now, or the climate situation is messed up right now. It's a congealing of a whole bunch of issues that are eventually going to add up to an insurmountable situation, and it's really dire. So we need to be talking with each other, supporting each other, preparing emotionally, monitoring how we feel, and taking good care of ourselves so that we can navigate this crisis. As people say to me, I can't believe how I'm feeling. This is awful. What's happening with Trump? And I say, I love you, and it's going to get worse. Want to come to a support group?
I love it. Let's just use that to jump right in here. So you're calling this How to Create a Collapse Support Group. You pointed out why it's important to use the word collapse here. I'll just be honest. If I presented a group that I wanted to put together with that name right out of the gate, it might scare off a few people. But at the same time, if I don't call it collapse, if I just call it a support group, that may seem too broad. It's not specific enough. So who would show up for that? Who knows? It could be someone coming because they're having a problem with an addiction of some kind. And that's not exactly what we're there for. Sure. So how important is it that you pick the right name for a group? And does the word collapse necessarily need to be in there? What might be some other ways you could frame this where it doesn't necessarily trigger feelings of hyperbolic overreactivity?
Well, I'm aware of two groups in my community. One is called, and we're going to probably change the name, the End of the World Group. Okay. and the other one, to go back to my blog, the other group is called Islands of Light.
Okay. I love that. And so right out of the gate, I think it's important for people just to understand none of this is prescriptive. It's just loose guidelines for how other people, yourself included, are doing these things. Let's go ahead and jump in here. You offer quite a few suggestions, and I'm just going to reference the post if that's okay. You do start off by talking about how this support in this case is more emotional and spiritual, not intellectual. So talk about what you mean by that.
What I mean by that is we don't come together to talk about the research we've done and I read this book and I read that book and I'm telling you that collapse is going to happen by this time and in this way. And, it's not a place where we glorify our research.
Okay.
It's a place where people who are hurting about what's happening in our world come together and support each other. Another thing that we have in our group is we're making a game plan for, like I said, we've had some terrible forest fires here. All of us just watched the LA fire over the winter. And, the reality that the Forest Service has been cut to the bone so that we don't have the staff for fighting fires that we did, say, 2 years ago.
Okay.
And so I anticipate we're going to have terrible fires this summer all over the country. And who's going to fight those fires? We need to be prepared to have a telephone network, or maybe even some people want to get CB radios and learn how to use CB radios to connect with each other.
Right.
If we need help and support.
I love how you never forget to always include, look, this isn't always a political attack when it gets to your door. It doesn't always look like this party is trying to take your party's rights or powers or progress or whatever. It can show up in the form of natural disasters, and quite often it will. And so part of a community support group of this nature is not, and this is why I think it's so critical also that you're talking about, this is about emotional and spiritual connection, not I researched this and that, because research often tends to be It's just more of that naysaying of the binary. Well,
Yeah.
I'm on this side, they're on that side. Here's why this side's better than that side. And when you're doing that, you're missing a bigger picture.
And also, it can be a huge ego trip. Well, I read
Absolutely.
these books and I've been researching this guy, and he says, and it's like, no, none of that.
Well, and
None of
also you can get that wrong, but what you can't get wrong is being emotionally and spiritually supportive of one another. You can't screw
right.
that up in a way. So I love that. Now, you asked the first question. These are some of the things you can check off a list in terms of bringing your group together. Who in your local community can you speak with openly about collapse? If you have no one locally, do you have allies online? So I like that you've already opened it up for it. This can be online. Is there an existing group you can join, or would you like to create one? Is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I don't think anything beats local and meeting in person. I
Yeah.
think that's the, if possible,
If possible.
that's the go-to. But if it's not, then certainly create something on Zoom,
Yeah.
because there are people all over the world who are concerned about this, and they're starting support groups and anticipating what I'm talking about.
I love that. So now going to the next thing, it says, as stated above, it's important to focus that the group should be about support, not intellect. The human ego is always tempted to display what it knows or what research it's done and to debate accordingly. Resist the urge as much as possible. Always return to feelings rather than facts. Mansplaining or womansplaining takes people out of their hearts and into their heads. Emphasis should be on sharing emotions and concerns, not facts, and supporting each other around those emotions. I feel like we've covered that pretty well. Is there any other thing you want to say just as I skim over that there?
The longer we meet together, the more we get to know each other, the more acceptable those emotions are.
Yeah.
We've got one guy in our group. I just adore him. He will begin when he begins the sharing, because what we do is we have a person who is a facilitator, and we take turns on that. And then, we have some discussion. That person makes a presentation of some sort. It could be very simple. And then we have some discussion of that presentation. And we have a timer.
Okay.
So there's no letting off at the mouth, we're limited. We have really good boundaries.
I like that. I like
there's
that
one guy-
because some people they get going, like me.
They just love the attention, or
Or they just don't know when to stop,
don't know when to stop. And this guy always, he comes and he thinks I'm getting ready to share, and then what happens invariably every single time is tears come. And he'll hesitate, he'll pause, and you can see him kind of swallowing them. And we all say to him, hey, go for it. If you need to cry, let her rip,
Yeah.
We love you, we're here for you. And usually he composes himself, he gets it out. Sometimes the tears roll anyway, and that's perfectly okay.
Sure.
But it's like, to see that is beautiful,
Yeah.
because it's not, oh, I'm up here and I'm going to tell you what I know. It's just that simple, vulnerable humility that we're all in this together. We're all scared. We're all, needing each other's support, because we can't do this by ourselves. No way.
I love how this segues into this next point that you make here, is that because some people will insist it's going to happen if you have a group that occasionally somebody's really going to want to tell you about this thing that they discovered, this fact that they've heard, and how they really believe it for this, that reason or the other. And you talk about how you want to try to pull that into, so how are you feeling about that? And you mentioned that there are basically four basic human emotions: anger, sadness, joy, and fear. And so talk to me about that. How is that really at the core of all of it, really?
I know this from working with a lot of groups over the years. It's a very different conversation, has a very different feeling when people start intellectualizing.
Yeah.
You can feel that immediately, because it doesn't ring true. But when people begin to share how they feel, and you can begin to feel their vulnerability, it's like, for me, it's like, oh man, I want to support you. I'm with you, brother. I'm with you, sister. But the intellectualizing and the stating of facts is very off-putting. At least it is for me. And it's the quickest way for a group to fall apart.
Yeah.
For a group to really congeal and endure, I think we must have the feelings.
Well, I think that makes sense because we all know what it means to feel anger, sadness, fear, and joy. And whereas a new idea may present itself, I may not have ever thought about that idea. But if the idea elicits anger, for example, I've felt anger before. If the idea elicits joy, I've felt joy before. So if we can get down to those root feelings underneath ideas, even if the ideas persist, and quite frankly, it's not that you're saying don't talk about the real things that are happening. Those are the things that are actually sort of triggering or emoting these feelings that we're having. So the details of what's going on in the world or in your life, in your community, those are things that are going to come up. The point is just to not get stuck debating those or saying, what's the right side, intellectually to stand on these, right? It's use those as the doorway into your emotional state.
Well, our conversation right now is very current because tomorrow is another meeting of our Sunday group, and the person who's facilitating requested that we watch 2073.
Okay.
Which is why I watched it last night, because I'd gone by on Amazon Prime, I'd gone by and I'd seen it, and I thought, sci-fi, But he explained, our facilitator explained why we might want to watch it and talk about it.
Okay.
So I'm really glad that he did that. And I'm sure that we're going to have a lot of feelings to share about it.
Right.
And I don't think we're going to have much intellectualization because that's not who our group is at all.
I actually love that. That's great. That's a great note here to put in there is you can use resources, whether it's a film or a book or an article or something you heard about in the local community. You can use these things. These are the things that will often captivate us or capture us in some way and cause us to get stuck. And so when we use these things as pathways or avenues toward what makes us tick, what we feel about those things, now we can do something with that. You talked about how these groups are really for people who are willing to be vulnerable. And that if people are not willing to be vulnerable, then these groups may not be a good fit for them. Is that, you say that in your article, is that something you still stand behind?
I stand behind that very much because we just don't need people right now who want to run away from feelings and don't want to be vulnerable. We're all vulnerable.
Right.
That's a fact.
Right.
And we're more vulnerable than we've ever been in this nation.
Yeah.
And yet we don't even know what vulnerable is compared to places like Sudan or Gaza or, places like that. But we are all vulnerable. We don't know what's going to happen next. And that is one of the horrifying things about when an authoritarian government takes over. We don't know.
Right.
And now people are getting grabbed off the street and sent to hellhole prisons.
Right.
And these are not all people of color. They're not all people who live in other countries. This happens to Americans.
Yeah, I love that you're capturing this idea of us all being vulnerable. I think a lot of times, especially in this pop psychology place where we're at in our culture these days, that the idea of expressing your own vulnerability is sort of like seen as a merit badge if you can say I'm vulnerable. The reality is you don't become vulnerable when you claim that you are. You're vulnerable. Yeah. You're made of meat and blood and tissue, and you can be squished by a falling tree or a racing car that refuses to obey the speed limit. We are all vulnerable. It's in our nature, and so owning that is such a key piece of this. So to that point, a group like this is going to be challenging. If you're not, it's essentially coming to terms with the reality of your vulnerability as a part of nature. And if you're not coming to terms with that, that's kind of a prerequisite. It's almost the fundamental prerequisite of a group like this, right? Because we're not here to act like tough guys, tough ladies.
No.
Yeah.
And we're here to support each other.
Right.
That's the thing.
Right.
We're here to support each other. Now, another thing that our group has discussed and we want to at some point actually do is something that will help the community.
Okay. Yeah.
Is there some way that we can put ourselves out there so people know about our group and know about what we're doing? It hasn't felt like it's been time yet to do that.
Okay.
I personally think our community is going to need more trauma before people are open to that.
Okay.
But just remember, when you're in a group like this, you need to be vulnerable because other people are vulnerable and they need your support.
Right. Yeah, it's really I mean, that's true in great storytelling, I think, is if you can, the more you can make contact with your deepest, truest sense of being human, the more you're going to be able to connect with your audience in a truly, deeply human way, because you can't fake that. And so I like the idea too of having a community project as a possible goal for your group, but I also like the idea of not saying we have to start with that. Like if I started a group right now, I wouldn't feel comfortable starting with that. Because for me, and I think that group, we would need some time to learn to trust one another, learn what vulnerability in a group looks like versus vulnerability alone. I think a group experience of vulnerability would introduce me to my own private experience of vulnerability through a different lens. I know one of the things I've loved, I've done regular therapy before in healing from trauma, and I've done group therapy. And while I love regular therapy, group is always so much different, and in a way, I wouldn't say it's better, but it's certainly sometimes a lot tastier because other people, when they share their experience, it's just like, that came out, I made contact with it, it rings true for me. It didn't cost me my exposing myself to say it. Somebody else said it, but it's like other people bringing dishes to a meal. You get all these great things, but you didn't have to do all the work of making them.
Exactly.
And I love that about groups. You say there are 3 fundamental purposes, at least to one of these groups: emotional and spiritual growth in the face of collapse, physical and psychological support in the event of a local crisis, which can include a natural disaster, and contributing to the community through a group project. And so you just mentioned that. And I think we've probably touched on most of those, but let's dive in just a tiny bit on physical and psychological support. That's just practical help, right? So you're meeting, you're able to have these, I don't want to belittle it, but kumbaya moments with each other. You're able to really connect in these deeply emotional and spiritual ways. But there is a practical component to it beyond just that, right?
Yeah. So I am a baby of Social Security.
Okay.
Don't know how long that's going to be there for me.
Right.
I really depend on it.
Okay.
I also live alone. And I have neighbors around me. It's not like I'm isolated, but, in the event of a natural disaster, I've got my go bag and I got stuff in there to just throw in the car and take off with my dog.
Yeah.
But if my house were to burn or if there were some mass shooting near me or whatever, these are people that I can call.
Okay.
We all have each other's phone numbers. So we call, we email, we check in with each other. Oh, this is a terrible disaster. Do you need anything? Can I help you? Come over and stay with me for tonight or whatever.
Okay.
So it's concrete, practical support in the event of something really dire happening in our community.
How do you test a system like that? I know in the world of like emergency management and this kind of thing, they will literally do drills of things, but it probably is a little silly to drill a fake, disaster scenario with friends. Is the regular practice of getting together and staying in contact, is that the practice that makes you know, okay, this is real. These people are here. They're gonna answer when I call. Okay.
Absolutely. After a year and a half of being with these people, twice a month,
okay,
I really know that they're there for me.
Yeah.
And that in any emergency, I can ask for help. And if this person can't help, there's, 5 or 6 other people who probably could.
So that's great because you answered a question I was going to ask. You said you meet twice a month. So do you have a recommended interval? Once a week feels like it could be a little much. Once a month doesn't quite feel like maybe it would be enough. Obviously, if things really get bad and the shit hits the fan, people might meet a little more regularly than if they have a once a month,
sure.
say. What feels like a good, I mean, you've been doing this, so in your experience, what's been a good interval where it feels like it's enough time, it's not too much of a gap between? What's felt right to you?
Well, the twice a month has really felt right. And in the group that I'm in now and the other group that's being started by one of our group members, which I've attended twice, they're also doing every other. And I really think that works for now.
Okay.
And if things get really dire, much more than they are now, we need to, like one of the things we talked about in this second group the other night was the possibility of Trump declaring martial law.
Right.
And after the next protest.
Right.
Or whatever. And we talked about what that would be like for us. And one of the things we considered, because it meets in the evening, is, okay, what if we can't go out at night? What if there's a curfew?
Right.
Then how do we change, or do we change our meeting time, and to what?
Okay. So that's all on the table. You can talk about all that stuff.
Oh, yeah. And we have to be flexible.
Yeah.
Because we don't know what is coming down the pike.
I love just how matter-of-factly you talk about a thing like Trump could declare martial law. I shared an article the other day with my Facebook friends that talks about that. What if that were to happen? And nobody wants to talk about that stuff. Nobody wants to think about that stuff. That's scary stuff. But I know from my 4 weeks in the aftermath of the earthquake in Haiti in 2010 that nature doesn't give a flying flip about whether you're ready to talk about stuff or not. And by nature, I just mean reality. And whether it's a political coup or a political upheaval that just like totally changes the nature of reality in your community, or we just had some new fresh tornadoes blow through our area just about a week ago, wreaked all kinds of havoc, and they're still cleaning up from that, obviously. So these things don't ask our permission when they happen. And preparedness and readiness, it really is, it's not fun to think about. I'm a child who, my prime years growing up were in the 80s. And during some of this, recent stuff that's been going on, certainly since, the new administration has been in office, and just seeing how difficult and calamitous things are, even for people on, the Republican side, it's just a lot of chaos. It's a lot of whoa, nobody knows what's coming or where it's coming from. I just remember thinking back to when I was a kid in the 80s, it was super fun back then, and it's just not fun right now. And that's just the nature of reality is, you can get stuck on these nostalgic feelings about the way your life has felt before, about the way you really strongly, deeply believe that it still ought to be feeling or could be feeling. If you can just you almost want to grit your teeth and just believe real hard and it'll come back, but that's not how it works. And so you really have to be, you don't want to, I don't like the term prepper, but you have to be prepared. And that is on each of us to be as prepared as we can be. And preparedness doesn't just mean, like you pointed out, your go bag, or some people will call that a bug out bag. It doesn't just mean having a bug out bag. It can and certainly could mean that. Preparedness, first and foremost, has to happen right up here. And to your point with these groups, it's really it's allowing what's going on up here to make real contact with what's going on here, and to see what happens in the middle. And I think groups like this feel like almost the most natural and organic way to let that happen, because I believe as creatures, if I can rant for just a second, I believe that the brain and the mind are two different things. The brain is the organ in your head. The mind is your total sensory system pouring into the brain. But the cool thing about minds that is different from brains is I can't share your brain and my brain can't network with your brain. We are, in my opinion, only ever truly alone in our experience of the universe. Even in this time that we're having, you and I right now, my experience of it is mine. You don't know what it's like for me. Yours is yours. I don't know what it's like for you. We can never cross that bridge. The best I think that any of us can hope for is to be alone together. And that's when we're in one another's company, and it's really cool if we can do this in person, the human mind networks. Like, I want to use a computer as an example, like a computer network where all these different computers are like on the same, network. They're together, they're sharing information and vibing together. But it's so much more resilient, so much more amazing to behold. If you think of a school of fish or a flock of birds or a herd of gazelle, you can have this thousands of fish in a cluster. Danger comes from just one little point on one side, and within a fraction of a moment, boom, it triggers one of those fish, and because their minds are networked, the whole school will shift and move and dodge. And this happens in nature organically, whether we notice it or not. And humans are animals, and we do that too. And so I think that's a really practical reason why this kind of networking that you're describing needs to happen first and foremost, because that's the only way you can benefit from the full benefit that minds networked can offer. You're literally starved of that opportunity if your minds aren't networking. And the other thing is that you need to be doing it not only when things are dangerous. You don't wait till things get bad and then flock together and run in a herd. You have to be in the herd already. You have to belong to a networked group already so that the network is established, it's sturdy, it's resilient, it can take a ding, it can take a false alarm. Oh, we thought it was bad, but it's not bad. We're okay. We're still here. That was a good trial run or whatever. You can't just pull that out of your ass at the last minute. You have to be working on that. Does any of that connect with you?
I totally agree. And, it's like when you have these feelings, and I'm thinking fear and anger and sadness about what's happening in the world, to be alone with those feelings is absolutely toxic.
Toxic and unnecessary. It's unnecessary.
Right, exactly. And so I can't overemphasize how much we need this kind of support with each other. Somebody in that group needs you.
Yeah.
And you need somebody in that group, or lots of somebodies.
Right. And even if in the moment, even if you don't feel like you need that, give it time. You may never actually feel like I'm contributing a significant amount here. Some people won't want to be the facilitator. They're too shy, and that's okay, because you talk about give everybody an opportunity to facilitate. Some people won't want to. That's okay. You may be a person in a group who feels like I don't really want a standout role. I don't really want to talk a lot. And you may feel for a lot of that time that like I only kind of belong here in a perfunctory way. But I'll tell you right now, from my experience in surviving in disaster scenarios, like you will find very quickly when the, sort of shit hits the fan, that it's never was about whether you were giving enough or taking enough. It's never about that. It's, are you there and are you connected? And it'll all make sense when those moments rise. It'll all make sense. You talk about focusing on things like a book study. I think that's a cool idea. You mentioned the film. I would say it's probably fair to say these groups don't have to be book study groups or film watching groups. These are just ideas to keep things feeling fresh and new, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's as simple as, so how does everyone feel here tonight about what's happening?
Yeah.
What happened this week with these deportations and people being snatched off the street? What does that bring up for you?
Yeah.
Or the martial law conversation, and it's like we're so vulnerable to having natural disasters. Keep bringing it back to feelings. I don't think you can go wrong if you do that.
You talk about how these groups should be leaderless. So I come from a history, I have a lot of religious trauma. With religious trauma, it's not uncommon that there's a backstory of high control groups. So for me, one of the things I did when I kicked religion to the curb was I kicked organized gathering to the curb in a lot of ways. I threw out the baby with the bathwater for a while. And one thing that I like about the idea of getting back together is I miss some of that in-person community. I miss that, but I still have that fear. I still have a little trigger, like I don't want to get back into a group of people and suddenly it goes full cult on me, or, it gets a little batty, it gets a little crazy. Having leaders in these kinds of groups kind of feels like that's where the risk of that lies. And so I love the idea that you're saying this is leaderless. This is a leaderless thing, which feels in a way very Quaker to me. And interestingly enough, the local Quaker Friends meeting is a place where I feel safe, predominantly because it's led collectively by the group. It's not led by some, charismatic personality. How do you feel that that's really critical here?
Every meeting that we have in both groups, we start out with 5 minutes of meditation or silence. We just sit with our eyes closed for 5 minutes.
Okay.
And that just takes away all kinds of crap, all kinds of yammering, and all kinds of just, it focuses us. So, I go in there, I sit for 5 minutes with my eyes closed. I release, the burdens of the day. I get myself present to what's going on right now in the room. Then I am ready to have a discussion.
I love that. And so right now you're actually talking about structure, which is another thing you talk about in your post, like the meeting should have structure. So walk us through maybe that same meeting. So you've gone through this meditative, calming, opening sort of volley. What comes next then?
Yeah, so then usually the facilitator, and this could be done in many different ways, but one scenario is the facilitator then says, okay, let's go around and let's have 7 minutes for each person to share about the topic. And of course, we've sent out a topic in email before.
Oh, so that's in advance. So people aren't hit like on spot with like, now you have to think, okay, I like that.
So that means we're just going to start there. Who knows where we're going to end up, but that's where we start. And so a person shares, somebody's timing it.
Okay. Are there notes being taken, or are these more private than that?
It could be, but usually not.
Okay.
And so after 7 minutes, the bell rings. And then we say, thank you, Luke. Thank you, Carolyn, or whoever the person is who has spoken. Go on to the next person, same thing. And after we've gone around the circle, if it's a large enough group, then we might take a bathroom break at that point.
Okay.
Usually about a 5 to 10 minute bathroom break. And then, the facilitator might say, well, we talked about this, but we didn't talk about this, and maybe we can go deeper on this topic. And so he or she will propose what the next topic is, and then we go around again.
Okay.
7 timed minutes. And then it just kind of, okay, group is over.
Okay.
We can stay and talk more about what we talked about. We can begin talking about something else. We always have snacks, the people, might be munching through the whole thing.
Okay.
Last month we had a potluck.
Nice.
Which is our first potluck that we've had in a year and a half, where, we share food, and that was awesome. We don't do that every time, but once in a while, it's really sweet to share food with each other and just be with each other a little after the group with no agenda.
Definitely. I love that. And then you talk about afterwards, it's just sort of like organically disassembles. People just hang out. There's casual conversation. Yep. Some people may go, if you haven't had a meal, you may go out to dinner or do other things.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think this sounds really phenomenal. I think it sounds really healthy. It sounds really proactive. It does, in a very tangible way, make my my biological self feel like, oh, you're paying attention to the anxiety in a very useful way. Thank you. Rather than just saying, man, I'm anxious and drinking a shot of whiskey, or man, I'm anxious and taking a drug, or, man, I'm anxious and turning on a TV and trying to like confuse myself and get lost. It's, it's not about coming together and fixing everything. It's actually not about that at all, really.
No, it isn't. And, I want to emphasize that every one of us is feeling that anxiety.
Yeah.
Every one of us, whether we're aware of it or not, is feeling that fear, that anger, that sadness.
Yeah.
Whatever. And we try to do a lot of things to distract. And that's okay to some extent. I mean, I'm watching and listening to much less news than I did 6 months ago, just to take care of myself.
Yeah.
But to try to say to yourself, well, I'm just going to shut this out and do something else or have another drink or whatever, that's not working.
Right.
That makes you part of the problem.
Part of your own problem, really, even if,
Your own problem and part of society's problem.
Right.
Because you're just shining it on and not taking any responsibility. I believe that we are really called at this time. It's mandatory that we do some kind of service for our fellow humans, fellow animals, for the earth, and allow ourselves to be called by something. Maybe it's working with children. Maybe it's working with animals. Maybe it's doing something in the area of conservation. Maybe it's just planting a garden and really tending our garden. But service is really important right now. Not to go shrivel up and go in your corner and say, I don't want to think about it, but to think about it with support, like I'm talking about, and then give back, give to your community, to your fellow humans, animals, beings of nature who need you.
Beautiful. Well, Carolyn, I want to thank you again for just giving up so much of your time this is service, as I see it, to people you will never meet or see or know heard this. And certainly I take it as an act of service to me. You don't owe me this much time or attention or energy or thought or just love. And so I'm deeply grateful that you've agreed to join me for this conversation. I want to encourage anyone and everyone who has been inspired by this to really seriously consider creating a group of your own. You can meet in a home, you can meet in a church, a library, you can meet at the park, wherever you are in your part of the world. You don't even have to be in the United States. If it feels like an important thing right now, even if you're not in a position right now where you feel like you're in any kind of real threat of this, that, or the other, Carolyn is always right to point out, like, nature is still being nature out there, which you're a part of. And we all know through our own unexpected health crises and things like that like emergencies show up when they show up, not when we're ready for them. And being connected and being networked in this very real way is just a huge way of showing up for yourself. It's a huge way of showing up for your community. And so a couple things I'd like to close with is, if any of you have watched or heard this and you think you might be interested in starting a group of your own, and you're comfortable sharing that with either myself or Carolyn, like either leave a comment on the video or shoot one of us an email. You can find Carolyn at carolynbaker.net. You can find me at lukerenner.com. Just let people know, hey, we're out here doing this, because I think it's going to make us feel like, hey, these are not conversations being had into the void. And then also, we're going to occasionally make friends with some of you and learn from you, and you'll have questions for Carolyn, this kind of thing. Is that fair, Carolyn? How can people make contact with you?
Absolutely. Carolyn at carolynbaker.net, just what you said.
Okay.
And, it's like for questions, for finding out more about my books, for coaching,
you
for
offer
whatever.
Coaching, right? I definitely would encourage people, and it can be. Would you be able to offer like short-term coaching, even for example, if somebody wanted some of your ideas for starting a group? Sure. Can you offer does it have to be an extended commitment?
No, absolutely not.
Okay, well, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn. Thanks to all of you for tagging along for this conversation. I actually believe in my heart that it's going to make a difference, and I think I might start a group like this in our local community. Who knows? But if I don't start one, I'm sure as heck going to try and find one to become a part of. And I'm inspired by you, Carolyn. I love how you are not afraid to look the what if in the eye right now. I've shared the what if, which can be very scary sometimes, quite frankly, with some people that I know and love and deeply respect. And sometimes I get a lot of, I don't want to think about that back. And one of the things I love about you is that you're just not afraid to think about it, but you also don't let it overtake you. You're just there with a steady hand and a response that says, like, so what? There's still stuff we can do. And I love that about you, and I love you, and I thank you so much, Carolyn. Anything you want to close us out with?
Just to thank you so much for having me here and being able, allowing me to talk about this, because it really lights me up. And I love what you're doing, and I want to hear from people. I really do.
Definitely.
I'm here. Talk to me,
Awesome.
Talk to Lou.
All right.
Thank you
Well,
all.
we'll be looking out for those emails and communications. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.